You know how in most sports you want to score more points to win, and most companies want to sell more products quarter after quarter? Well, it seems like Sony went to bizarro business school, because let me know if you've heard this before. Xperia just had its worst quarter earnings report ever.
This is fine.
Now you might say, hey, no, man, that was last quarter. But guess what? They just had another terrible quarter, and it beat out their last quarter for being their worst quarter ever, and it's only likely to be beaten next quarter by an even worse quarter. So let's get into the numbers. Oh yeah. With Q2 fiscal year 19 now behind it, Sony Mobile's reporting how its division did during that 3-month period, and boy are the numbers bad. Now, as you guys can see from this chart, Sony Mobile's been on a downward trajectory pretty much since 2015 and hasn't been able to recover since. Now, unlike previous years and quarters where Sony Mobile was its own segment within Sony, the division has been brought in under Electronic Products and Solutions segment. What this basically means is now within a single division, Sony houses Xperia sales, electronics like home theater and TV products, as well as their cameras. For the general consumer, this really doesn't change anything, but this does mean that when we are looking at their earnings reports, it's really hard to deduce what the real numbers are since so many products are lumped into one category. So is it Xperia that's really causing the division to drag, or is it cameras that's really helping things out? That part is hard to determine. But what we can determine are sales, because Sony does still post individual sales for particular product segments like Xperia smartphones. And boy, are things going terrible. Sales compared to Q2 fiscal year 18 are down by 1 million, where in the same quarter in 2018, Sony sold an abysmal 1.6 million smartphones during the 3-month period. In this 3-month period, Sony was only able to sell 600,000 smartphones worldwide. That means sales were down more than 50% for the quarter, and with an outlook that started at 5 million smartphones shipped for the entire year, Sony later on revised that number down to 4 million, and now the new revision stands at 3.5 million. But if I were a betting man, I'd say chances are that Sony's only going to be able to sell 3 million smartphones this year, which is really bad when you're a multi-billion-dollar company with the legacy that is Sony. Now, one of the reasons that Sony's seeing such a huge reduction in sales number is because they've pulled out of most territories, where they at least used to operate in parts of North America, most of Europe, and most of Asia. Sony now only operates in a handful of countries in Europe, like France, Germany, and UK, as well as Japan, and that's pretty much it. That means Sony Mobile no longer has a real presence in South America, Africa, most of Asia, and even in North America. It's really a trinket of a presence because they're actually not in any retailers outside of select kiosks and a handful of Best Buy stores. And so obviously when you reduce your global presence, you're expected to take a huge hit in sales, and that's exactly what's happened to Sony Mobile during Q2. Now, in some ways, Sony was likely hoping that Xperia 1 and Xperia 5 would ignite sales, but frankly, while Xperia 5 is an interesting phone, and Xperia 1 is merely okay, especially when compared to competitor products like iPhone 11 Pro and the latest Galaxy, it's unlikely that either phone are going to really be able to do much to turn Sony Mobile's fortunes around. Because frankly, even if the phone sold gangbuster numbers, which they likely won't, Sony Mobile's just not in enough countries to see its sales rise. And so that means next quarter, when I stand here and report Sony Mobile numbers, don't be surprised if it's their worst quarter ever. Again. Now, I'd love to hear from you in the comments section. If Sony Mobile had an actual real presence in the country or city that you lived in, would you buy any of their Xperia phones? And if so, which model interests you the most? Or are their products, just compared to everything else out on the market for the past few years, uncompetitive? With the downward spiral in sales, there's also another perspective worth thinking about. Even if Sony could sell each Xperia smartphones with 100% profit margin, something that's impossible as their phones are likely closer to 20, maybe 30% profit margins if they're lucky, they're soon reaching a point that keeping the division around with things like R&D, marketing, inventory, and production is going to cost more than any kind of money they're going to bring in from their sales. Because with that impossible 100% profit margins, will selling 2 million smartphones be enough to keep Sony Mobile, the division, around with all the costs that are associated with it? Perhaps not. And at which point you need to start looking at reducing products you're developing so you can actually keep the division lights on. And then obviously, the fewer products that Sony has, the fewer markets that they're going to be in, which ultimately means even lower sales. This then becomes an equation of going round and round where the division itself slowly spirals out of control, though in a lot of ways that's already happened and Sony just won't realize how dead Xperia really is. Our numbers just so much fun. Now help me be the opposite of Sony Mobile. Instead of seeing my subscriber numbers go down or stay flat, let's help them go up. And you can do your part by hitting that subscribe button and then hitting that bell button to be notified when my next video goes live. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can even hit that like button so the algorithm gods know you guys watch my videos and they'll show them to more people. And if you're on the socials like the Facebookies and the Instagrammers, you can hit that heart button. So do it. Let's have a better quarter than Sony Mobile. Which just means even if one of you subscribe, we probably just had a better quarter than them.